And that treaty talks of setting up a world government. The word is circled there on the screen. Not very easy to read in this light, but there it is. And there was going to be a government, a facilitative mechanism, which is UN speak for a police force to come round and make governments do what they're told, whether they like it or not. And of course a financial mechanism, which is what we would call a tax. They were going to have powers of taxation and of environmental regulation. Now, I didn't make any of this up. It's in the draft treaty. I'm glad to say the treaty failed because we publicised it. But this is what they were trying to do, and they still are, as we'll see. So there's the government mentioned again. It will be ruled, not by the people, you notice. It will be ruled by the COP, that's the Conference of the State Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, with the assistance of the people who really do the ruling, a series of interlocking bureaucracies. And it was going to have the power, among other things, of closing down the free market and having public policy, which meant policy set by this government, a policy of setting the market rules. No more free market. Bye-bye to the prosperity of the West, which came because we had a free market and nobody else did. And they were also going to have enormous financial powers and taxation powers, including the imposition of a worldwide ETS, which might make New Zealand feel a bit less alone than she no doubt feels at the moment, but would still do absolutely no good, as we've seen, to make global warming go away, because we have, of course, costed not only the individual Australian case, but also we've looked at the world case. If everybody had an ETS scheme, you still wouldn't be making any global warming go away at an affordable price. And there are the democratic provisions for the election of this government, all of them in all their glory. Some people are trying to look and read the screen. I'll just help you out here. There aren't any. And here then is what happened, because they're now having these conferences every year. The next one's going to be at Durban in a couple of months' time, and last year it was at Cancun in Mexico. And here are the bureaucracies they established in Mexico. Look at the titles if you can read them. They're pretty scary, because they sound so unscary. And they set up these ones, and those, and these, and those, and these, and those, and these, and those, and these. Nearly 1,000 new interlocking bureaucracies, all answerable to the Conference of the State Parties, the Secretariat, the new government, have already been created. You are already paying for them through your taxes. And I bet not one of your government ministers has ever told you that. And I bet certainly that not one of your mainstream news media has told you the name or existence or the purport or import of each one of these near 1,000 new bureaucracies that were established at Cancun. I know because I was there and I got the draft agreement. And I'm one of the few people who has seen it. The press saw it and didn't report it. I reported it and I'm reporting it to you now. It's very, very bad news for the future freedom, prosperity and democracy of the West. But in any case, is CO2 really worse than the poverty and disease we might alleviate by spending the money on that instead? As Rothgardo rightly says in another sensible point in his otherwise dopey report on the economics of climate change, every cent you spend on trying to make global warming go away can't be spent on anything else, like helping starving people in Africa. So for instance, CO2 is in fact good for you. The more CO2 is emitted per head of population, the longer that population lives and the fewer child deaths you will have. And are we, on the other hand, going to condemn Africa to this energy cycle? Energy source, timber, transmission on the backs of the people, and consumption and use in the smoke-filled huts where they live, where the children die of respiratory diseases because there are no chimneys? Or are we going to let them have the electricity that we have already been fit enough to have? It's not going to screw up the planet if we let them have the same electricity we have. It really isn't. And here in Haiti, even before the terrible earthquake of a couple of years ago, are people living off mud pies made with real mud. Our fellow citizens of this planet. The poor people live on mud pies made with real mud. You take the mud, you beat the stones and the weeds out of it, you pulp it with a little water, you can get in it, it won't be clean, but you do what you can. You add a tiny knob of butter if you can afford it, a tiny pinch of salt if you can afford it. And and you mash it, and you pulp it into a rather unpalatable patty, and you put it out to dry in the sun for 6 hours, and then you eat it to try and keep yourself alive, or you sell it to your neighbours, as this emaciated individual is doing, for 3 US cents each. Well, it was 3 US cents each, but then came the global warming scare, and the biofuel scare that came out of the global warming scare. Because even though biofuels actually emit in the total cycle more CO2 per mile travelled than proper gasoline, and they wreck the motor of your car as well. Nevertheless, those who have to be obeyed these days decided this was to be done. They introduced it, and as a result, half of all the corn maize growing land in the United States is no longer growing corn maize for us to eat, or for the poor people who hate it to eat. It's going to feed clunkers that don't need it and run less badly on it. Less well on it, I should say, than on real gasoline. That's how silly all this is. As a result of getting on for half the world's food growing area and potential, they've doubled world food prices in the last 5 years. The World Bank says that that doubling is attributable more or less entirely to the biofuel scam. And the result has been mass starvation and the deaths of millions, leading to food riots in a dozen different regions of our planet. And how many of you have seen those food riots, any of them, reported at any time in the last 5 years by any of your mainstream news media? Once again, I do not see any hand going up. You're either all asleep, or your news media are all asleep. One or the other. Yes. And I think it's your news media that are all asleep. They are not telling you what is happening to your fellow citizens, because your governing class and ours, I'm not blaming New Zealand uniquely for this, goodness knows not, have lost the plot. They are no longer capable of thinking or acting rationally, and as for the poorer people of the world who are starving in their millions, they do not bloody care, nor do your media. So let us just remember what's happened here. When I told this story originally at a high-level briefing conference in Madrid for government officials, a lady in the front row burst into tears. And I said, "Madam, I'm very sorry, I wasn't intending to cause this amount of distress. It is a very distressing story." She said, "Oh no, she's unhappy." And I said, "What?" She said, "Yes, you see, I've just come back from Haiti. Everything you say is true. The mud pies were 3 US cents, now they're 6. Starvation is happening all over, people dying everywhere, food riots, the lot. Everything you say is true." But she said, "You're the first person that I have heard in the West who understands at all what is going on in places like Haiti, where I've spent the last few years. And I can't tell you how grateful I am." Now this is terrifying, that there are so few people who are looking at this in a wide enough context to understand that it's not just a scientific problem, it's not just an economic problem, it's not just a political problem, it is a moral problem. We are doing harm to our own citizens. Unless you think that I am somehow being unduly extreme or just making stuff up. Here is what Herr Jean Ziegler, the UN's Right to Food rapporteur, has to say about this particular point. When millions are going hungry, so that's his figure, not mine, the millions who are dying of starvation, it is a crime against humanity, his words, not mine, that food should be diverted to biofuel. Now he is the one official who will be retained in his post when I have the pleasure of sweeping the rest of the UN away altogether.
You can have colour.
And here is a lady who doesn't look sad at all. This lady has just had her sight restored after suffering from trichiasis, a multiple infestation of the eyes with the trachoma, which causes the eyelashes to grow inwards and pierce the eyeball, eventually causing excruciatingly painful blindness. It costs $8 to cure that, but every $2 trillion we spend on trying to make global warming go away, and counting, is an awful lot of $8 that we can't spend on getting smiles like this from people who we can so cheaply and so easily cure, if only we can bring our wretched government classes to bloody care. And that $8 spent on this lady is a better amount spent than the trillions they have tried to spend on making global warming entirely futilely go away. And here are the children of Africa staring at you with their hopeless, hopeful eyes. They, unlike your governing class and mine, are not for a single moment worried about global warming. Their worries are more immediate and far more urgent. They are starving now. They are thirsty for clean water now. Water which doesn't bear parasites and diseases in it now. Clean and safe sewage disposal today. Healthcare and disease prevention this hour. Education this minute. These are the things they want help with straight away, if not soon. And so why can't we divert the one good thing that has arguably come out of this entire climate catastrophe, which is, at last, that nation is speaking peace unto nation at these great international conferences? Can we not retask these futile climate conferences to talk instead about the $75 billion a year, which is all that it would take to make sure that these children have just as good and comfortable and clean and healthy and well-fed and watered an environment in which to be educated as we were lucky enough to have. That is what the UN estimates it would take. And yet, instead, the UN and your governments and all the usual suspects are instead saying that from 2020 we should spend $100 billion a year on this futile cause of making global warming that isn't happening and won't happen at anything like the rate predicted go away. It is senseless. And it is time that in New Zealand and in other countries as great as New Zealand, with the tradition of freedom and democracy and prosperity and success and common sense that we enjoy, we do not allow this evil nonsense to continue a moment longer. For if we do, then we are in danger of losing the age of enlightenment and reason in which we were fortunate enough to be born, and which was the foundation of the success of the West. And in losing that, to pass forever, perhaps, into a new, dark age. And to that thought I say with the poet, do not go gentle to that last good night. Rage, rage against the ending of the light.
Ask questions from. So I'm going to invite the audience to ask questions, and rules of debate are going to be one question, one answer, and we'll work our way around the room, and so we don't get repetition questions coming from the same person. So,
fire away.
Let's have the first question. Right, we'll go this way.
You can see I'm an old man, and I used to be a nuclear scientist, nuclear engineer. I would like you to make a statement or a comment about what I believe to be so important, that science really is not about proof. Science is about hypotheses, and there are so many misunderstandings, and people think that a scientist has said it, so it's true. And it is not about the proof of things, and it's something I've learned as a scientist myself. So could you comment?
Yes, certainly, sir, that's quite right. And of course, I did try to illustrate the difference between proof and hypothesis. What I didn't do is I wanted to try and shorten the presentation a little bit. I left out a slide about Karl Popper's formalization of the scientific method in his celebrated paper of 1934, in which he established for our time how the scientific method should operate. Yes. And his particular formulation was you start with a general problem, like the world appears to have been warming up for 300 years, which is why the ladies' bloomers, as you remember, were getting shorter all the time. And therefore, what is causing this? That's your general problem, GP, he labelled it. Then along comes a scientist with what you have called, quite rightly, a hypothesis, a tentative theory. And note the word tentative.